How to easily and successfully sow annual flowers at home. For that particular reason, I chose a very special sowing tray. You could certainly use any tray, but this specific one is not perforated. We're going to carefully put some crates inside the trays you typically find when you get all your little flowers. And we're going to fill this tray with potting soil. So a special seedling soil is important because if the soil is too rich, we risk having rot later on and simply not succeeding in our sowing. So we're just going to fill our pots. We're now just a bit slightly mounded. So here, there are 3 trays which represents 30 pots. Once we're done, we're going to top it off by adding just a little bit of potting soil. The potting soil absolutely needs to overflow. Pots. I'm packing it down with a small board. And since this is a pretty delicate sowing, I'm going to sift some potting soil on top, still using our seedling soil very lightly, very finely, to fill in the gaps, since for some annual flowers we'll be dealing with very tiny seeds, very fine ones. And once we're done, now we can start our sowing. But before sowing, it's important to level our potting soil again, still using our very fine seedling soil, so we can clearly see all the pots reappearing, to space them out properly, and especially to separate them well. At exactly the appropriate time of sowing, I'm going to start by sowing nasturtiums. These are giant nasturtiums. So the benefit of sowing giant nasturtiums pretty early is that we can set them up as soon as it stops freezing. On the balcony, for example. And here, we won't need to transplant them since they're directly in a pot. 3 seeds per pot is more than enough. And I continue with some marigold seeds. So these are quite elongated seeds. Marigolds and Indian pinks, those seeds are very similar. The difference between nasturtiums and marigolds is that nasturtiums can stay in the same pot, while marigolds will need to be transplanted in about 15 days to 3 weeks. The principle of sowing is pretty much the same for everyone. Here, we're talking about yachabu, so the seeds are a little bit smaller. We're going to scatter them, just like we're going to do with the ignats, even though it's a slightly larger seed, as we proceed. So we're carefully counting about 10 or 15 seeds per pot, and gently. So don't forget that these are seeds that will be transplanted later, approximately. And I just want to clarify about the impatiens in total. The big difference with impatient seeds compared to all the other seeds is that you definitely shouldn't cover them up once you finish sowing. Now we're going to move on to the Rudbeckia marmalade seeds. These are very tiny black seeds. The advantage of this variety of Rudbeckia is that it's a dwarf variety that we can use for the edges of flower beds, and it blooms yellow. Just like with the nasturtiums, I'm sowing the ipomoeas, seed by seed, 3 seeds per pot. So just like with the nasturtiums, it won't be necessary to transplant the ipomoeas before planting. They'll stay in the pot until the end, until it stops freezing. There we go, we've now finished our sowing. We're going to take out the 4 parts of impatiens since they shouldn't be covered with soil. And we're going to sift on top to cover the seeds as much as possible to ensure even coverage. With our little board, we press down carefully and gently one last time on top. Using a consistent motion, I'm repositioning my impatient seeds to make sure they are properly positioned. I'm watering thoroughly and evenly. So we're going to spray some water at room temperature, around 20 degrees Celsius. Moisten well at the start, but that's it. And as your seeds start to sprout, you can separate them, pot them up, and take them out of your mini greenhouse. So what's really, really important when you're doing indoor sowing is to make sure to expose the mini greenhouse to light.